Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
Good morning, everyone. You have tuned in to the WITEE Chatterbots show, Women in Tech, empowering everyone. And I'm Carmen Murray, a woman in tech, passionate about technology, innovation, and strategy. And we're coming live from the Brand Live studio in 27 Boxes in Melville. Now, as you all know, the show is designed specifically to give you a taste of topics to explore with mavens and rising stars, and to give you a new perspective on the changing landscape in business and how to evolve and adapt. Now, today's guest is Mikhaila Hunter. And actually, ladies and gentlemen, for our listeners, I saw her at the Future Ad conference and she was on the panel, and I was most impressed by her way of engaging on some very sensitive topics. So I decided to invite her over. She is a distinguished expert in marketing and communication at Fort, a rising star at a very young age, achieving great things. And she comes with chutzpah, and definitely a name you need to look out for, ladies and gents. Good morning, Mikhaila.
Hello, Carmen. Thank you so much for having me and for that amazing introduction. I hope I live up to it. Makes me a bit nervous.
Don't be nervous. Listen, this is a place where we share our passions, and we're just going to go ahead and get into it now.
Awesome.
The topic that we really going to unpack, and I think when you were at the Future Ad conference, this really inspired something for me. With the position that you hold at Fort, marketing communications manager, I think that crisis management is a big deal, and we've seen quite a lot of things erupting in the marketing universe and product universe, which we'll unpack a little bit later. But I just wanted our audience to know that today we're going to unpack the hacks for successful crisis management and give you the tools on how to deal with digital outrage by customers and the press. So before we start, tell us about your background and how you came about to be an expert in marketing communication and what makes you special.
My background is fairly short, seeing as you mentioned that I'm quite young. But I studied at Tux. I got my undergraduate and my postgrad honours degree there, BCom Marketing. And from there, I actually decided, I always promised myself after I did my honours that I would take a year off and I would travel.
Good.
So I took a year off. I backpacked through Central America. I worked in the States. And then I also did some volunteer work, and I did some internships in the States, mostly around social media. So that's kind of, like the studying days and what I did then. And I think then formally, my career actually started more in the PR space. I always knew, though, from the beginning that when I was in there that it wasn't necessarily like my full passion point or, like my sweet spot, if you will. But it did give me such a great background, specifically in comms. And that's, what we are speaking about today. And then, since then, I've been with Fort for the last 2 years as the marketing and communications manager.
Nice.
Fort is a creative content and production network. So it's quite cool. We're very different to like the traditional agency, if you will. We don't actually like that word, but
you had a very cool word for that on the panel. What did you mean to say that it was? Brand.
Oh yes, we think of ourselves as a brand of creativity. Yes, so we actually call ourselves thinkers, makers, and creators, and we've got a whole suite of services and people in our company. From editors to animators to script writers to art directors, all of that kind of thing. Strategists, consultants. We really cover the full base, like the 360 kind of experience that you would need in creativity. We don't limit ourselves there. And what makes me special and all of that? I must say, I do not consider myself an expert at all. I do consider myself passionate about marketing and comms and advertising. I consider myself having a knack and a talent for it. But I think most importantly, I consider myself willing to learn and excited about it. So excited to learn. And I think what makes me special, this might be a bit of a cliche answer, but I think what makes me special is that I'm the only me, So what I have achieved and what I will achieve in the future, only I can do the way I can do it. And no one else can do it the way I can do it. So I think that's what makes me special.
Great attitude to have towards life, if I might add. And
thank
you know
you.
what? I was actually on LinkedIn the other day. They had something about they turned 15. What were you when you were 15 years ago? What was your passion? And I actually wanted to become a forensic auditor.
Okay.
And I studied my BComs.
Yes.
And then once I started working with numbers and my crazy personality, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not working out for me. I'm bored to death. And once I started developing into my career and I started always wanting to learn more and more and more, that's where my true self actually got born.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to see and very refreshing to see somebody like yourself that is just embracing change and really taking knowledge in. So well done and kudos.
15 years ago, I was like 12 and I wanted to be an actress. So
you never know. You never know.
True. Maybe I'll get discovered one day still.
Okay. Well, so ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the real juice. So I think you would agree with me. In the world of communications, things are not always positive, fuzzy and fluffy and a tap on the back. We've seen some crises hit brands like H&M and Tiger Brands, incidents that come out of nowhere and have a whole nation up in arms. I mean, the reality is, if you can't predict these things. No. I mean, there's no way of you knowing this is going to happen, no matter how much data you sit on. My question to you, Mikhaila, is how do you prepare your team for the unlikely event of this happening? It's almost like a fire drill, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, to be honest, I think the most important factor here in preparation is just that. It's the actual preparation. It's actually sitting down and making an effort to do that. So I think, in the Tiger Brands example, I think, for instance, their slow response time can perhaps be an indication of the fact that maybe they weren't prepared for this. Maybe there wasn't actually a team that sat down and did look at crisis management and actually went through like the preparation process. And I think in this industry specifically, when you're dealing with like consumer goods or, FMCG, I think that's a little bit irresponsible, to be honest, just because, I mean, these are products that, we actually use on our, like a skincare product. We use that on our skin, or food. We consume it in our bodies. So it can actually affect like your health. And so with these types of products in this industry specifically, I think the actual preparation of actually sitting down and having a comms plan in place is really important. So I think, I mean, also, no one likes fire drills. Let's just be honest. They're boring. And well, I mean, aside from the fact that you get to leave your desk for a little bit, which, I mean, I'm not going to lie. That can be.
When you have a deadline, it's not fun.
Yeah, when you have a deadline, no. But when you're bored, you might be like, yeah, I get to leave the desk for a while. But ultimately, it's inconvenient. People are like, oh, it's such a waste of time. But I think in comms, you need to have this plan in place, and you need to actually sit down and do the basic prep of having a comms plan in place, having, what channels you will use, having the messaging, having spokesperson training done, having a spokesperson identified for if a crisis happens, who does actually talk, what do they say? And I think perhaps same with like the H&M example. I think, perhaps if they had a local team that was actually had a say in the campaigns or had a say in the messaging, then I believe that maybe this issue wouldn't have necessarily happened if that team was prepared.
100%.
But maybe to be honest, I think in both cases, perhaps the actual preparation wasn't even done. So I think that's the most important thing, is the actual act of preparation itself.
And as you mentioned that, something sparked off was, wouldn't it be great if you actually handled it like a fire drill, when you almost say, guys, we've got this crisis. It's not real. It's fake. Nobody knows that. And you put people in a room and you say, solve it. What is the plan?
Yeah,
what are we going to do?
Definitely.
So that people can actually start thinking about the type of scenarios and practically putting it in place. Exactly. So I love that idea. Now, my husband actually used to be a journalist, and in the heydays, and he's a news junkie. And 4 of the questions that a journalist would ask you when a crisis hits are the following: what happened? Why did it happen? What are you doing about it? Who's to blame?
Yes.
Now, how would you advise a brand to answer these questions in the most impactful way?
So I think my advice here when answering these 4 questions is 2-part. I think being honest and educating your consumer, your audience. So I think, for me, communication is communication. Whether it's interpersonal between me and you, whether it's a brand communicating with its consumers or audiences, ultimately what it boils down to is communication. And I think effective communication is really important, and that's what helps build or maintain build these relationships and can repair relationships. So I think the point of actually thinking about it as communication on the whole is really important. And no one likes to be ignored, for instance, so communicate often. Or no one likes to be lied to, so be honest, No one likes not to be communicated to, so communicate to them, educate them. So I think practically, I think educating your consumer is really important, because if they don't know the details of the brand or your specific service or product or the actual crisis at hand, then they really can fall prey to any other communication out there, from like fake news to what your friend is saying on their social media, to what a different media company might be saying that might have a different agenda. Whereas I think if you educate your consumer often and you're having that effective communication and you're being honest with them, then I think it's something that can be combated. And I think that's the most, like, those two things I think would be my advice when answering those 4 questions.
100%. And I think that also, just to add to what you're saying, is I think that the 2 questions that you should really focus on is what happened and what are you doing about it.
Definitely.
If you focus on those 2 and try and rather not focus on the other 2 questions as much, that you can drive that positivity forward.
Exactly.
Last week we had Benjamin Schroeder from KFC Yum Brands here, and we were talking about, about the brand and how they do things. And the most interesting thing for me was that he was talking about their extreme hygiene and ways of doing things. And you'll always see some stories going around. I found a rat fried and these fake things that happen. And it's humanly impossible, some of these things. Like an insect, I found an insect on my KFC. It will be fried to death.
Yeah.
There's no way that it can be. Also, after I think an hour and a half, the food gets chucked out, and they send it out because they have very high standards of hygiene and fresh food. And if your consumers know these kind of things, they're not going to just, they're going to have understanding and compassion for when something goes wrong, because they know that you're doing the best that you can.
But if your consumers don't know that, then
exactly.
brandlive.co.za.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
Brand Live.
No doubt.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we are an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we had crisis management happening on this side in real life.
did.
We actually had an experiential part of it. We had a little bit of a glitch with the tech on this side, so we do apologize. So I am going to rephrase my question. Did I handle that crisis?
You handled it so well.
Okay.
You took all the advice I'd given in the first 3 questions and you executed perfectly.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase my question and then we'll take it from there. So I wanted to talk about the roles and responsibilities specifically.
Yes.
So when a crisis like H&M, the hoodie crisis, the monkey in the jungle, then how EFF got involved, destroyed the stores. How are you dealing with these international counterparts? There's strict code of conduct. You've got lawyers, that's also international that maybe don't understand the local implications.
Yeah.
So how could brands handle these kind of things better?
Yeah, I mean, I think the H&M example is quite a tricky one because, as I mentioned before, when it's really difficult when global brands come into a local market such as South Africa, without truly investing in in the consumer, the market, and the audience, and truly knowing them. So I think, how would I handle an incident like this? To be honest, I think that there needs to be a systemic change and a shift in the strategy to enter a market. So I think, if a local agency or a locally owned agency, ideally, had actually been in charge of, or at least even had a say and been in the room when this campaign was formulated, when the messaging was, decided and the comm plan was put into place, then I think perhaps a crisis such as this wouldn't have even happened in the first place. Because I think, like local agencies and the local market, we know what to be aware of and what to look out for. So perhaps if that had been the case and we had a say, and if H&M had invested in the local market and, really doing their research around it, then, that you wouldn't necessarily run into an issue with the EFF because we would have been able to flag that before it even happened. I'm a firm believer of, you can't expect one campaign or one TV ad or one message to resonate with audiences around the world. And I think a lot of global brands fall into this pit. They think that they can just expand into different markets, into different countries, and keep the marketing budget centralized with their, agency in New York or London or whatnot. And they don't think about the fact that there needs to be a whole different team, a whole different budget, and it really needs to be a proper, effective, thought through strategy. So yeah, I think that would be my most important point on this topic. And then, roles and responsibilities, I think that would then sit with the local team.
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm actually now, as you speak, I'm thinking about, I think it was Dove.
Yes.
Was it Dove?
I think I know which example you...
And I read a very controversial article, but it did resonate with me, is also one thing that we are seeing in our working environments, and to no disrespect to millennials, is also that they grew up in a completely different era where everything is equal and united. And a lot of the history and all of the things that happened in the past sometimes disappears, where it's not as top of mind, but it's the older generation that takes offense. And there's this whole mix of things. I'm not saying that it's completely accurate, but I do think being disconnected from the past and where all of those things come from, if you don't understand it, you can't connect to it.
No, definitely. I mean, I think also ultimately, the pillar of marketing and communication is research, or and data, and having that and knowing you can't go into this industry without acknowledging the importance of that basic pillar and foundation. Because if you don't do the research, if you don't know your audiences, I mean, how can you expect to connect with someone if you don't know them? I mean, think about just your personal relationships.
100%.
Only until you know someone do you connect with them. And it's the same as, like I said earlier, communication is communication, whether it's personal or brand communication. Same as relationships. You're not going to connect with someone unless you actually know them and have invested in it. So I think the same kind of principles do apply.
100%. I mean, I'm married to an Irishman. And he has a big deal with the potato famine. Has not forgotten it. And it's the same with issues that's happened, in our country and things. And, for me in the beginning, when he spoke about the potato famine, I was like, what is the potato famine? Why are you always talking about the potato famine? And it's just understanding each other's backgrounds and relating to it and having empathy and compassion for it.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So one thing I always think about is, okay, a crisis like this hits. Now all of a sudden, it's not just impacting consumer, but it creates uncertainty with your staff, logistics, finance, partners, and much more.
Yeah.
So let's chat about that. And what do you think would be the best way to tackle that kind of uncertainty?
I think, with uncertainty among various stakeholders, perhaps your communication plan needs to be a bit varied. So just the same as how I'm not going to speak to my boss the same way I speak to my girlfriends at a girls' night, or, you don't speak to a child the same way you speak to an adult. I think exactly the same way as that happens, you can't communicate the same way to different stakeholders. So I think it's important to identify where each person is coming from. For instance, a shareholder's concerns are not going to be the same as an entry-level staff member's concerns, for instance, or the legal team's concerns are not going to be the same as the media's concerns. They're completely different. So I think the first way of tackling this is relating to each stakeholder on their level. level.
Good point.
And then I think it also comes down to, just the basic principles of effective communication, to be honest. So, a quick response time, being honest and transparent, communicating often, and making sure, I think also that what's important across the various stakeholders is making sure that you are sending out the same message. I think, yes, it can be varied in how it's communicated, but I think ultimately, your message needs to be the same and everyone needs to hear the same thing and know what's going on. So, I think that's important.
I totally believe in that, because I do think that if you don't communicate, all these conspiracy theories start.
Yes.
Which is important to try and, make sure that doesn't happen. So for our listeners, recently we saw the biggest PR crisis hit South Africa, and it's still ongoing, which is this listeriosis outbreak.
Yes.
The point of our show is not to point fingers, but it's more about brands and how we can learn from it. People died, shares dropped, products were recalled. Very much a lack of transparency. Trust shattered.
Yes.
Now, my question to you is, I think being in communications or being on an account when that happens must probably be the most trying times of your career. If I had to look at the situation objectively as a customer and as a communication specialist, how could they have handled this better? As there was a lot of judgment that this was not handled correctly.
Yeah, I think I think if the basic principles of crisis management and in comms could have been applied, it would have turned out better. And these are just basic principles that you can learn in varsity or that you can literally Google. It's nothing like super fancy that I've come up with myself. But one of the first things is response time. And I do think that, there was like a 24-hour period between the health minister's statement and then the company's statement. And I think this in and of itself was like their first mistake. And I think it was a big one, because I think, you feel like as a consumer or as the audience, you feel ignored, and let's just be honest, no one likes to feel ignored, So I think that this was the first mistake, is that not communicating effectively, like on time. And then I think secondly, it could have been handled through more frequent and strategic communication. So I think consumers felt ill-educated about what was actually happening. They didn't actually know what was happening from the company itself. And the communication that they did receive wasn't actually meaningful. And I think it's important, in crisis nowadays, you're not just competing with the media. You're also competing with the digital and social media space, which a large portion of our population have access to and can tell their own stories. So if the brand itself, and which happened in this case, is not actually engaging with their stakeholders and communicating effectively and in time, then other media, and then social media on top of it, it will overshadow it. So I think that's what can happen a lot of times in these cases, that they weren't communicating effectively. No one knew what was going on from their side. So we heard all the other stories and we got everyone else's opinion. So I think that's the second thing. And then lastly, I think it would have been a lot better if it was handled with compassion. And I think,
100%.
you need to acknowledge where your audiences are coming from and how they're feeling. You're dealing with human beings, and we're driven by emotion. And I think even more so in this case, where lives are affected, the brand really needed to show a lot of compassion. And I think, you can look at compassion as like a fluffy thing, or, it's just like, it's an emotive quality. But I truly believe that having compassion from a brand to their audiences and their consumers can help build a bond that puts those consumers and the audiences in a more receptive state to, more receptive to your
100%.
communication. I think that they would have received the communication far better if there was compassion in it. They would have been a much more receptive state.
I totally agree with you. And I mean, especially 182, I think it's 182 families were affected by that. And it started with 40 children.
Yeah.
That also, got impacted by it. I don't know all the stats around it. All I know is I saw on Carte Blanche one of the things about the health inspectors. They didn't want to allow the health inspectors into their factories, which is, for me, sending red flags.
I mean, completely.
And that complete sense of denial. And, I think that is, as you say, it's so important to be very transparent. Your response time needs to be quick, but you need to show empathy and compassion.
Yes.
And I think if you handle it with the fact that we're dealing with human beings, you are responsible with your product to best serve that customer
Completely.
and take care of their health. So yeah, no, I really like the response that you gave on that. The other question would be, now all of this happened. Now, how on earth would you be able to build trust?
Yeah, I mean, you can't change the past. But I'm a firm believer that you can learn from it. So as daunting as it may be, and I think maybe the first step actually is to admit there was something wrong, a mistake was made, but that you're willing to learn. Because I think, if you're not willing to learn, then then you're kind of screwed. There
you go.
But yeah, so I think that's where you start with like a willingness to learn. And then I think you use the above type of like those examples that I gave, and like the stuff that you can Google on like effective communication management, and you use those for the future, and you take learnings from those and adapt, and then I think with brand building, again, this is something you learn in school or varsity. You can Google like the basics of brand building. You threatened us with back in the day. It'll dissolve in the teeth.
And they've taken that and they've improved their product. There was also the element of cocaine or something that was in the Coca-Cola. And they've taken their product, they've evolved it, they've improved it.
They've listened to their consumers.
They've listened. And now it's a brand that sells happiness.
Yes.
And listen, I buy into that happiness and I want to be part of
that.
that.
A lot of people do.
And when you hear that sound, that click sound when you open it and you hear the gas bubbles, I mean, like, it's all of these various things of how a brand takes all of this into consideration and takes the negative and turns it into something positive.
Yeah, it's proof that it can be done.
100%. Now we're going to go for a quick ad break. This time a real one.
We hope.
And please stay tuned in. We've got some very interesting questions to ask afterwards.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
Brand Live.
No doubt.
Making a bold statement yet blending into the surrounding suburbs of Melville, 27 Boxes is a realization of edgy design and practical implementation. A radical departure from the shopping malls of our generation, yet not a return to the high streets of our youth. 27 Boxes showcases the best of a shopping centre set in a garden, surrounded by the bohemian suburb that is Melville. 27 Boxes, shop, play, eat.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Grow! Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstownmedia.co.za.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Good morning, everybody. You are tuned into the WITEE Chatterbots show, Women in Tech Empowering Everyone. I'm sitting here with Mikhaila Hunter, and we are talking about crisis management and some hacks in how to deal with situations like this. So we're going to continue the conversation. So recently, I did an interview with Rihanna Smith, who's the head of digital for iWise, and she said something interesting. She said that the game has changed. Almost everybody now has the ability to be a journalist and be a source of information to those around them. Now, my question to you is, news is out and now people add their own twist to the facts. And not only are you dealing with the issue at hand, the real problem, what happened, but people start making their own conclusions and adding to that, and sometimes creating fake facts that's circulating on the net, social media, and going viral. And now all of a sudden you're dealing with two completely different issues. What hacks could you offer to combat this?
Well, firstly, I'd actually like to add to Rihanna's statement. I think not only does everyone have the ability to be a journalist anymore, I think we all have the ability to create content, to be our own content creators now with social media and creating our own videos, being our own directors, editors, etc. So, but yeah, I think in the case of what hacks could I offer for this? I think fake news, I think to be on top of it, you need to make sure that your communication as a brand is clear and effective, that you communicate often. And I would argue that I think the most important thing to combat fake news is educating your consumer through your communication. So I think often people can fall prey to fake news when they actually don't know about your product or your service and that kind of thing. So I think an example that pops in my head now is, within the financial industry, with all those numbers and whatever, like let's say for me, let's say I don't know anything about the financial industry and I'm not well versed in it. Well, then when fake news pops up with all these different numbers and percentages and then obviously I'm going to be easily fall prey to that because I don't know the facts. So I think that really the most important thing, along with being effective and clear and communicating often, is educating your consumer. Because if you know for a fact the product's qualities and what it stands for and all those kind of things, then you're not going to necessarily be easily fooled by this fake news. So I think those are the easiest ways to combat the effects of fake news on audiences and consumers. I don't think it's avoidable completely, but I do think through these kind of communication techniques that it can be managed.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think one of the biggest topics that's also coming up is about, programmatic.
Yes.
Advertising and also ensuring that, you do the right steps and use technology to your advantage in order to make sure that your ads are not served on the wrong
definitely
sites,
yeah,
fake
there's
sites.
been a lot about that recently.
That's a big talk at the moment as well. And I think it's also dealing with the problem at hand and not giving too much attention to the fake news.
Definitely.
Because once you start getting involved in those conversations, you're not going to get out of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, then it's just an
ongoing fight. It's where do we stop and where do we start?
Exactly.
Now, in conclusion, give us 10 successful crisis management hacks to consider when we face a crisis.
Okay, so not in any order.
Okay.
But I think it's just stuff that I've spoken about throughout the whole interview. But I would say communicate often would be one. I think something I feel passionate about, I spoke about often, was to educate. That's what you need to do with your communication. I think relate personally to your audiences. I think that's really important. The fourth one, I think about your platforms and the channels that you use and how to use them specifically. How do you best use each channel for your communication? I think this is a cliche, and I think everyone knows this. Honesty is the best policy. Firmly believe that. Which moves, and then number 6, I would say then transparency and transparent communication. And, I think just in today's day and age, you really can't afford not to be transparent. Consumers are so much smarter, have so much more access. As we spoke about, they can be their own publishers, their own content creators. So if you aren't transparent in your communication, I genuinely don't foresee your brand sticking around for much longer, because we're only going to get, as audiences, more we're only going to get smarter and have more tools at our disposal. Then number 7, I would say prepare. So actually do the dirty work of sitting down, having a plan in place, write those templates, have the responsibilities assigned, have a spokesperson assigned, do the training, actually sit down and have that done, be prepared. I think then number 8, I would say learn. If you're not constantly learning and adapting, then what are you doing? 9, I would say having monitoring systems in place is really important. You need to know what's being said out there about your brand. It can also help flag certain crises before they actually happen. So I think that's really important, just to have those monitoring systems in place.
Do you have an example of a monitoring system?
Oh, I mean, such a basic example, something that it was one of the first things I had to do in my PR days, was having Google alerts. And anyone can do this. You don't have to be a professional. Yeah. You don't have to, literally any person can set it up on their laptop. And you're having certain keywords in Google alerts, having certain key people, their names in it, so you know what's being said out there. You need to always scan those macro and micro environments and know what's actually happening out there and what's being said specifically about your brand. And then lastly, and most importantly, I would say localize. You need to know your market. You need to have a local team on the ground. You need to invest in local companies and local campaigns that actually speak to and are targeted to our audiences.
I like that. It's always, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't read this book, please do read it. But it's called Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. And it's a book about culture and how to do business with different people from different cultures, whether it's South Africa, China, like simple things that you think might be ordinary is things that's very offensive to others. Like what comes to mind is in China, like I think you can't wear black and white together. If you wear that, it represents death. In Turkey, if you're a woman and get offered a drink, and it's like, you know.
And then, I mean, that goes back to like if a global agency is in charge of a brand campaign that goes out and they just and they don't think about the different markets they're in, and they do a picture of someone wearing black and white and they just slap it on for the China market, like they don't realize that can be so problematic.
You can't.
So I really I'm very passionate about like this localization and using local teams and having budgets for those local teams.
100%.
I hope all the global brands out there are listening.
Well, they definitely will be listening soon. But I mean, also just one of your other points was the best use of every channel.
Yes.
That I'm sure you're familiar with the Passion Project, the Connected Marketer that I'm bringing to South Africa. And one of the things there is also, merging the physical, digital, sensorial, and emotional experiences and in a seamless way. And by best using every channel to best serve your customers.
Yes.
And it doesn't just relate to marketing campaigns. It relates to, when a crisis happens, on what channels are you going to say what and how are you going
100%.
to say it? So I totally agree with you on that. Right, now we're at the best part of the WITEE Chatterbot show. As you know, this is a fun show, so we are a bit cray-cray. Okay. So, rule is, we're going to have a ticker going.
Oh, no.
Right?
Now I'm really getting nervous.
I'm going to ask you 10 questions.
Okay.
And you have to say first thing that comes to mind and just see how many questions you can get through.
Okay.
All right, on your marks, get set, go. What would the world be like if it was filled with male and female copies of you?
Oh, I think it would be very complicated. I'm very goal-orientated and I'm so competitive, so I can't even imagine a world where there's lots of competition against me.
Hello, well, welcome to the corporate world. What is the weirdest thing you've seen in someone else's home?
Oh no. I don't know, exotic animals, maybe.
Okay, what is the funniest corporate business script you've ever heard of?
Funniest?
Yeah.
I've seen so many, where the translation goes wrong in different languages. I think those are really,
that's
really
funny. Okay, first think of a product now. What would be the absolute worst brand name for one of those products?
Oh, wait, these questions are hard, Carmen. Because I thought of water. What would be the worst name for water?
3, 2, 1. Oh my!
Those are really hard. Because I have a water bottle in front of me. Those are really difficult. I feel like that was the that was like the most nerve-wracking part of the interview, not the other questions. I thought you were going to ask me favorite color, favorite destination.
I'll make them simple next time. Well, listen,
maybe.
when you co-host one show with me,
no, I'm going to do hard questions.
you're going to do hard questions, yeah. Like the one I want to do too. I have to tell you this one. So the last one that I had here was, who do you know that really reminds you of a character in a TV show or movie?
Oh my gosh. So it's so funny. Actually, I know someone and her boyfriend looks like Will Ferrell. And it only got pointed out to me recently.
Yeah.
I've known him for a while. And I looked at him and I was like, oh my gosh, you literally look exactly like Will Ferrell. And I hope this person is not listening, because when they told me, the boyfriend was really upset that he made it known. Yes.
Well, welcome to my world. People used to tell me I look like Miss Piggy. Ah!
That is so rude. Who told you that?
I'm not even
No,
going
man,
to go there.
just
So I'm
own
like,
it, though.
maybe if I just do this.
Yeah, just own it.
Camera. I'll just own it.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening into the WITEE Chatterbot Show, Women in Tech Empowering Everyone. Please subscribe to all our podcasts on iTunes. You can find it when you go Booyah by Carmen Murray. And you will find all of our various podcast episodes and today's episode. Now, we would like to thank Brand Live Radio for making their studio available to us and their amazing staff and to help us to get everything recorded and also share our knowledge live on Brand Live. And I also want to thank Solid Gold Studios for managing the iTunes account and empower our audience to never miss an episode. Now, for all of us, bye guys and have a super week.
Bye.
Bye.
Brandlife.co.za is Thought Leadership Radio. It's a new way to communicate your brand, your value, and what you think about your industry. Be a leader.
You'll never stop at one. I'll take you all on.
Be your voice.
I have a dream.
And we will help you shape your industry. Our radio platform is for thought leaders who want to share insights, businesses who want to create value for their databases, organizations who want to control their message, for those that drive change. Make your brand come alive on brandlife.co.za, harnessing the power of talk radio.
You're listening to the hottest internet station. Brand Live. Internet station. Brand Live. Internet station.